Welcome to today's Explainer. So, we've got about 9 minutes today to essentially build a macroscopic economic machine completely from the ground up. We're going to be exploring a really foundational macroeconomic model known as the circular flow of income, or the circular flow of money. We're going to visualize exactly how money continuously pumps through the arteries of our economy, keeping absolutely everything moving. It's an incredibly elegant system once you see it all laid out.
But before we start, drawing lines and mapping out theories, let's ground this in everyday reality for a second. Where does your paycheck actually come from, and where does it go once you spend it? You go to work, money appears in your account, and then you spend it on groceries, rent, maybe a new pair of shoes. But where does that money go after it leaves your hands? Does it just vanish, or is it part of a massive, continuous loop? Well, that everyday financial reality is exactly what we're going to scale up today. We're going to trace those individual dollars as they aggregate into the literal lifeblood of the global economy.
Here's how we're going to break this down. First, the economy's main players. Second, trading factors of production. Third, the circular flow explained. Fourth, entering the closed system. And finally, the ultimate economic equation.
All right, Section 1, the economy's main players, a two-actor stage.
To really grasp this model, we have to start with this perfectly symbiotic relationship. On one side, we've got households. That's us, representing domestic units that supply resources and purchase goods. And working in perfect tandem with us, we have firms, which buy those resources and use them to produce goods. Our whole economy is essentially based on just these two entities continuously exchanging value in the market. One literally cannot exist without the other. Without households, firms have no workers and, well, no customers. Without firms, households have no goods to buy and nowhere to earn a living. It's this constant dynamic interplay that forms the absolute bedrock of macroeconomic theory.
Moving right along to Section 2, trading factors of production, the exchange.
So, what exactly are we exchanging? To understand that, we have to look at the factors of production. These are the core resources, things like labor and capital, that households supply to firms so those firms can actually produce goods and services. Think about it. When you work a 9-to-5 job, you are literally supplying a factor of production, giving a firm the raw human ingredients they need to create value. It's not just a job. In macro terms, it's a transfer of foundational resources. Firms desperately need this continuous influx of human energy, time, and machinery to keep their assembly lines moving and their software compiling.
Now, households obviously don't just give away these resources for free, right? We receive a specific reward, which is known as a factor income. If you provide your labor, your reward is a wage. If you provide capital, your reward is interest. And if we introduce land into this model, the reward for providing that physical space is rent. Every single factor of production handed over to a firm results in a distinct financial reward flowing right back as household income. This is absolutely crucial to understand because it establishes that every single cost a firm incurs to produce something ultimately ends up as income for a household somewhere in the economy.
Now, you might be wondering, how exactly does a normal, everyday household supply capital to a massive corporation? Well, capital essentially equals investment, and in macroeconomics, that investment is funded by savings. When your household puts leftover income into a savings account, a pension, or the stock market, you are indirectly providing the capital that firms use to invest in new factories, server farms, or equipment. Household savings actively fund firm investments. It's a pretty powerful realization that the collective savings of everyday people are the very engines driving corporate expansion and technological advancement.
Okay, Section 3, the circular flow explained. The loop begins.
Let's watch how this actually builds into a continuous loop. Step 1. Households provide factors of production to the firms. Step 2. The firms employ those factors and pay factor incomes back to the households. Again, that's your wages and interest. Step 3. Households take that newly earned income and spend it on consumption, buying the very goods the firms just made. And finally, Step 4. The firms receive that consumer spending as revenue. And then, the cycle starts all over again. This literal chain of spending and income is the heartbeat of the financial world. It never stops. The exact dollar a firm pays out as a wage today will very likely walk right back through its front door tomorrow when that worker buys a product.
And what do firms do when they receive that revenue from selling goods? That money is immediately put back to work. Firms use that new revenue to produce even more goods and services. To pull that off, they have to pay for additional factors of production, right? Hiring more labor, borrowing more capital from households. This constant reinvestment is what keeps the entire cycle alive and thriving. If the revenue is strong enough, firms can increase their overall production levels, which in turn means they need even more labor and capital, naturally driving up household incomes. It is an intricate, totally self-sustaining loop that drives economic growth and keeps our whole society functioning.
Which brings us to Section 4, entering the closed system, the sandbox constraints. To truly observe the pure mechanics of this flow, we're going to introduce what economists call a closed system. This is an economic model that completely ignores the government and assumes there is absolutely zero international trade. By purposefully zooming in purely on just households and firms, we strip away all those messy outside complexities to build a perfectly isolated economic sandbox. You know how in science, to understand how a specific mechanism works, you isolate it from environmental variables? Well, economists do the exact same thing here. We're freezing the borders and removing the state entirely to see how the core engine of commerce operates purely on its own.
In this isolated environment, everything outside of our two main actors is set to exactly zero. Government spending? Zero. Taxes? Zero. Money from international trade or net exports? Zero. Foreign direct investment? Zero. There is no government intervention to artificially boost the economy, and there are no open borders allowing money to escape overseas. It's just households and firms trading back and forth in a perfect vacuum. This constraint is vital because it guarantees that every single interaction we measure is a direct result of that core household-firm dynamic, without any external noise muddying the waters.
Because we've set all those outside factors to zero, we arrive at a golden rule. No leakages, no additions. Everything must balance. Because the economy is entirely closed off, money can't just magically disappear through taxation or buying imported goods, nor can it suddenly appear out of thin air from a government stimulus. Every single dollar moving in one direction must be perfectly mirrored by a dollar moving in the other. It's like a closed hydraulic system. If you push liquid through a sealed pipe, the exact same amount of liquid has to come out the other side. The flow is perpetual, and the balance is absolute.
Finally, Section 5, the ultimate economic equation, putting it together.
Let's quickly summarize the three major components we've been tracking here. First, the total incomes paid out by firms for the factors of production. Second, the total output, which represents the absolute value of all goods and services produced. And third, the total expenditure, meaning all the money households spent consuming those goods. In our closed loop, these three things are deeply, mathematically bound to one another. Understanding exactly how these three distinct measurements interact is really the master key to unlocking the central premise of macroeconomics.
This leads us to a pretty fascinating mathematical certainty. All of the income that is received is going to equal the total value of all of the output that is produced, and is going to equal the entire expenditure that is spent. Because there's literally nowhere else for the money to go. All income generated is spent entirely on the total value of everything produced. It's a profound realization when you think about it. You can look at the economy from the perspective of the earner, the producer, or the shopper. And because it's a closed loop, you are ultimately just looking at the exact same value passing through different stages of its life cycle.
Which brings us to our grand conclusion. Income equals output equals expenditure. By isolating the circular flow of money, we prove that every single penny earned as income is exactly equal to the total value of what is produced, which is exactly equal to every penny spent. It's a perfect closed loop where the value of the economy can be measured at any of these three stages, and it will always yield the exact same number. This identity right here is the absolute bedrock of national accounting and GDP measurement. If you want to know the size of this economy, it doesn't matter if you measure the total incomes, the total production, or the total spending. They are mathematically identical.
It is just an incredibly satisfying model. But as we wrap up today, I want you to consider this provocative thought. What happens to this perfectly balanced flow when reality steps in? What happens when the government actually does start taxing and spending, or when borders open up for international trade? Suddenly, we've got leakages draining out of our system and injections pumping extra money right back in. Think about how this whole machine adapts the next time you see taxes leave your paycheck, or the next time you buy an imported product. You are witnessing the complex reality built right on top of this beautiful circular flow. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today.